I moved on to a comic called Sonic the Comic, which some of you may know, which is based on the same characters. And I realised I was going to have to use a much bolder, brighter style of colouring, but the early efforts that I did looked absolutely hideous to me now. They just looked far too garish. This was actually done with something called intense watercolours. They were kind of liquid watercolours that they produced, which were really intense inks. But the problem was, if you painted over the top of them with a opaque colour, they would just bleed through. So it was very hard to cover them up if you made any kind of mistake or wanted to do a highlight on them. But eventually I settled into the style in a way that I liked. I was using the sort of fairly flat colours for the characters, but doing quite sort of painterly backgrounds. This was actually done with acrylic inks, which dry waterproof, so you can keep layering the colours on top of each other, which is pretty much how I work digitally now. So I started using colour once I was happier with it in more creative ways. In this case, just to focus the attention in the centre of the panel, or to create a mood. This was based, I don't know if any of you have seen the American Werewolf in London. There's this bit where the two American guys walk off the wall into this British pub, and just everyone stops talking and turns to look at them. That was inspired by that scene. Again, to use colour to create different atmospheres. This is the first time I've actually coloured someone else's work. This was another Sonic artist called Roberto Corona, and it was just a joy to colour his work. I couldn't believe I was getting paid to do it, because I really, really loved the guy's artwork. And I basically just got paid for colouring in that. And but one of the problems with this stuff was he used to use this quite sort of textured watercolour paper. And as I said, I do a lot of airbrushing, so you'd have to mask areas off with this self-adhesive film. And once it got slightly wet, this paper, then it would tear immediately. And I would spend half an hour trying to sort of ease this masking film off the paper, trying not to tear his artwork. It didn't always succeed, so the results were worthwhile. I also started experimenting with colouring his artwork. So, in this panel here, for instance, all this was black line when it was drawn, but what I did, I masked certain areas off and airbrushed them with an opaque layer of blue, which just created extra depth in the panel and sort of brought the main action forward. And by this point, I was getting really happy with my colouring work, and I really like the spaceship in the top panel there. I was starting to use sort of more than one light source on the colouring, so this one's slightly overlit as well as having the light from the top. This was my first professional writing job, which was a series of 6 Teenage Mutant Hero Turtle strips. They're actually called Hero Turtles in this country because they thought Ninjas was more PC. But I put this one up because the lettering on this was actually done on a computer, printed out on paper, cut out and stuck on an acetate overlay, which was the only way that I could do anything that approached digital lettering at the time. So basically the artwork was painted, but then it had an acetate overlay with all these bits of white paper with the lettering stuck on top of it and the alliteration of the artwork. I don't think you missed that. So, showing digital. I got to a point where I was drawing everything still on paper, scanning it in, and at some point, I can't remember exactly when, I started colouring stuff in Photoshop. So I draw all the different bits of line work separately, scan them all in, have to line them all up digitally, and then start colouring it to produce something like this, which looks fine, but it got to be a complete pain in the bum, actually, trying to line this line work up and having all these different bits of paper floating all over the place. And I'd started using Illustrator for some puzzle pages I was doing for a Thunderbirds comic. So the figures in this are all drawn on paper and inked on paper, and then get scanned in. But the more graphic stuff, the puzzles themselves, are actually created in Illustrator. And then again, it's a sort of question of lining it up and rubbing different pieces of the artwork out to create the whole. got to the point where I thought, well, I can't be bothered with this, and I started using a graphics tablet to actually ink stuff digitally in Illustrator. Is everyone here sort of familiar with what a graphics tablet does? Basically, instead of a mouse, you have a pressure-sensitive pen. So the harder you press on the tablet, the thicker the line becomes. And this was my first effort at inking something colourful digitally. It was still a pencil on paper, but everything else was digital on the computer. Now, yeah, don't throw up. So I posted this on DeviantArt a while ago, and someone said, I saw this and I was almost sick. The point of this is that working on a graphics tablet, inking stuff in Illustrator, means that you can vary the style considerably. For this, for instance, I use a far more brushy brush, which means that the harder I press, the thicker it becomes. Because the ponies need this sort of smooth but fairly organic looking line to it. Whereas for something like the Mr. Bean work I did, the line is actually a lot more mechanical looking. You can see that it varies very little. When you're working in licensed character work, which I ended up doing, you have to adapt to a lot of different styles, and it's not just a question of drawing it, how the characters are supposed to look, but actually imitating the sort of line style that they use in the actual characters. So a few more examples. This one, of the builder sample I did, I've actually got rid of the line work completely. This was created simply as shapes in Illustrator, imported into Photoshop, and then rendered in Photoshop. For something like Spider-Man and Friends, which I do for Panini at the moment, I use a much sort of bolder comic strip type line, but I tend to outline the characters with a much bolder line than the interior line work, just to make them stand out from each other. Another example of licensed character work, but in a different style. In this case, it had to be created entirely in Illustrator because they wanted each figure done as a full figure, so they can move them around separately if they required it, because they never knew quite what the cover layout was going to be. So I literally had to draw every single character, every single panel as a full figure, which was, fun. So a few other styles, I do some icon design for websites. I do occasionally book covers. These were both done digitally, but you can see there's quite a difference in the sort of style that I've used between the left-hand one and the right-hand one, which is more from the graphic. I also do some book illustration, technical illustration. Again, a much more mechanical line for this, but with a few sort of more freehand flourishes just to make it a bit more interesting. I also do logo design, which is I was interested in from the work over. But again, this is purely sort of using Illustrator. And I do some more realistic work, in which case the emphasis is far more on the colouring in this case than actually on the line work. I've actually subdued the line work quite a lot, merged it and made it slightly transparent so that it doesn't overpower the actual colouring.